Welcome back to the Tool Crib. Today we are looking at the Leatherman PST, or Pocket Survival Tool. This was the very first plier-based multi-tool. It was originally introduced in 1983 and it ran for 21 years, finally discontinued in 2004. Now, in early 2018, Leatherman reintroduced the PST as a collector's edition model that you can purchase through Leatherman, but it comes at a very steep price of $275. I don't feel the need to buy that one because I have one of the original models, so I think I'm good. So Tim Leatherman, in the late 70s, he had this idea for a multi-tool, what he wanted to build, or what, his design, his concept, and he tried to sell it. He tried to sell his idea to make his first million and get his life started. Well, nobody would buy it. And so he was finally forced to have to produce it for himself. And can you imagine that? Can you imagine 7 years straight? You have an idea, you're completely broke, and you're trying to get this idea to market, and you get rejection after rejection after rejection. Well, his perseverance paid off because in 1983, Cabela's took the first order of 500. And within a week of receiving their order, they had sold out. And the multi-tool industry was born. And now I would think that some of those companies that turned down Tim Leatherman might be kicking themselves just a little bit. The PST is a very special multi-tool because it started everything for the multi-tool world. Without it, we wouldn't have the multi-tool variations that we have today. They simply would not exist. So it's important to pay homage to the original. Let's get a little further into it. We'll talk about the specs, what was good about it, what was bad about it, the tool set that came with it, all the ins and outs. Let's get started. The first thing I want to say about this original design is that it was a very, very compact design and very sleek, very slender carry. So the original was 5.2 ounces or 147 grams. It was a 4-inch wide or long multi-tool, and that's the size that we're going to find most of today's standard multi-tools in the 4-inch frame size, and that translates to 101 millimeters. It was only 1 1/8 wide, or about 28 millimeters, and only a 1/2 inch thick, or right around 13 millimeters. The knife blade on it, even the original, had 428C, so they've been using 428C in their blades since the very beginning. And it was 2.5 inches or 63 millimeters. Well, let's get it opened up and we're going to take a little closer look at all those tools that are within it. The first thing that we're going to start out with looking at are the pliers. And the pliers are very nice on this multi-tool. They even come down to a little bit finer point than today's wave. So they have those very fine needle nose, and then they have their main pliers, and they have wire cutters, and this one has hard wire cutters. And I could be mistaken about this, but I think that the very, very first models that came out did not incorporate the hard wire cutter. I think they were all straight and just soft wire cutters, but I could be mistaken about that. I'll have to double check that actually to know for sure. Then we get around to the first tools, and we'll start on this side with the knife blade. So the knife blade is 428C, and they were using 428C back on those original blades. It's a very nice blade shape, especially considering how compact it seats into this multi-tool. And like I said before, this is 2.5 inches or about 63 millimeters. One thing to note is that none of the tools lock out. They're all slip joints. And the slip joint has a decent retention, not quite as good as some of the slip joints of today, but it held in there decently. You notice that all the tools kind of clump out too. The center tools kind of clump out. Well, they do have their own, some of them have their own nail nicks like this awl does. These two screwdrivers do not. So the very first one had an awl. Now this did not have a sewing eyelet, but it did have a decent little awl with that reaming cut edge on it. So I haven't personally used this one to know, and I intend to test this one out as well as all of my multi-tools and get them on video, because I want to see how different multi-tools compare to one another, and that is going to be forthcoming, I assure you. The next two tools are going to be your two screwdrivers, two of your flat drivers. The one on the outside edge is 1/4 inch, and the inner one is 3/16. Very good drivers. Now, one thing I will say about the 1/4 inch driver, this is not one that I would have recommended that they use as a pry tool. And the reason I say that is because of this slip joint. You'll notice that there is a gap between the outside of the frame and the inner tab here for the slip joint. And so you can actually put enough pressure on there that I'm afraid you could damage that if you put too much on it. So not quite as strongly built as some of the multi-tools of today. And if we get flipped around to the other side, first tool is going to be our combination can opener bottle cap lifter. Now, this is pretty similar to the can opener style that they use today. The exception is that they added in a wire stripper. Another difference is that the newer generation can openers, they taper down to a more fine point, where this one maintains its thickness throughout and only grinds down on the cut edge here. So I'm not sure how this will perform compared to the can openers that Leatherman uses today. And then our next tool is a Phillips driver. They have a full dimensional Phillips on here, and there's a couple other multi-tools that kind of incorporate the same styling, where the shank of it is thinner, and then they have full dimensional Phillips on the end. Very good driver here. And then the next tool over is our last screwdriver, and that is a finer 1/8 inch screwdriver. Very good for a number of different tasks, these little screwdrivers. And then the last tool on the interior tools is going to be a pretty well built file. And in fact, this file is a lot finer than some of the files that are on Leatherman tools today. Now, the originals didn't have any diamond coating file, and so this is a single cut. Actually did have an edge file and then your cross cut file. Now, the rebar file, which I'm going to bring the rebar in here in a little bit to kind of compare with what I think that the rebar is really the PST for the 21st century. It's a much more refined version of this style. So while the rebar file is a little bit better, this original file was pretty good, actually, not bad. And then the last tool that we have is the ruler. Now, the ruler on here is actually more usable than some of the rulers of today, because they put it, it has a full stamping across here. It's just a really good ruler. It really is. Now, this is 8 inches or 19.5 centimeters. Now, this is not quite a good ruler as what you would find on some of today's multi-tools, like the Victorinox Swiss tool. The Swiss tool has a very, very good ruler because you're able to read off this edge, off the side, where this one, the stamping is all on the back of the housing. But nonetheless, the original had a pretty good ruler on it. Last item that they had on there was a very small lanyard ring. So while it's not the easiest thing to attach a lanyard to, it was available on here. Now, let's talk a little bit about what the good points and the bad points of this very first model were. The good points on this multi-tool are, from my perspective, I think every tool that they put into this multi-tool was useful. The pliers are very good. The knife is very good. While it doesn't have a sewing eyelet, that's not something that I use. So I like a reamer awl, but I don't need a sewing eyelet. I know some people do. That's just not me. The screwdriver selection was pretty good. And then the Phillips driver. The can opener, like I said, I haven't tested that out to know just how well that functioned, but it's nice that combination can opener, bottle opener was on there. And then the file is actually pretty decent, and then the ruler itself. So the tool set that they chose for this was actually pretty good in total. I really don't have anything bad to say about the tools that they selected for this multi-tool. One exception. I think they would have been better off had they gotten rid of this little tiny screwdriver or the medium driver and installed a saw. But the way this is designed, this is a 4-layer tool, and the way all the tools nest in there, they actually didn't have the space for it. So they only could put 2 long implement tools in there, as opposed to being able to put two on the other side because of the way the frame is designed. Where in today's model, the version of what I consider the updated PST is the rebar, and the rebar does have the ability to put longer implements on the other side because it's wider. It gives you another layer. So you have that allowed them to put the file, saw, and both blades in here, as well as maintaining nearly all the same interior tools. So you have a much improved Phillips driver, an improved combination can opener, bottle opener. The driver here is about the same, a very much improved awl, and you'll notice that the implements are quite a bit longer too, so it gives you more reach. The file is a bit more aggressive, and definitely the lanyard loop is better. The pliers overall are just stronger in every aspect on the rebar, but a lot of people hearken back to this original style, and so I think that's a big reason why a lot of people will go back to or choose a rebar as their multi-tool, because they do like this particular design. Now, there are some drawbacks to the original, and there's a couple, not a whole lot, but we'll talk about those as well. The first drawback that the original had was the fact that none of the interior tools were locking. So all those slip joints would actually move. Even when it's in the closed position, you could bend them over. Now, not so much important for little tools like this, but definitely important for your screwdrivers and definitely important for your knife. Whereas in the newer version of this style, the rebar, all the tools lock out. And so that is the first thing that was not great about the original, but nonetheless, it was a very, very good tool. The second problem that the original had was the fact that the way the housing was stamped. So we're going to continue to use the rebar here as a baseline for this. Now, the original didn't have any ruled edges on the housing here. So when you were using this and you were really clamping down on it, those could dig into your hand here. And actually, you probably see the marks of this leaving on my hand right now. So they could really dig into your hand, and it's something that you really had to wear gloves with, otherwise you get a lot of hot spots. Now, today's version, the edges on the rebar are rolled over, and so while they're not as comfortable as some of the other multi-tools in Leatherman's lineup, they are very, very much improved over the original one. And then, you know, like we talked about before, you can kind of see here how the housing is stamped, where the rebar folds out in both directions, gives you another layer, and that's what allowed them to put the longer implements on the outside, where in the PST they only bumped it out on one side. That also makes the rebar thicker, not as slim to carry as the PST. The only other drawback to the PST was the fact that the knife blade orientation was in what most people would consider the wrong orientation, because it's an inside accessible tool as opposed to an outside accessible tool. So when you're trying to use it, you can't get down on whatever you're trying to cut. Where you can open it up and extend your reach, but it's a little bit more cumbersome to use the multi-tool in that fashion. So you could alleviate it to a certain degree, but it wasn't the most comfortable way to do it. Been a little closer look at the Leatherman PST. I want to say thank you to all my viewers for taking the time to watch my videos, and if you've enjoyed this one, I would appreciate if you hit the thumbs up button. Today's tip of the day: remember that every time you talk to your wife, your conversation will be recorded for training and quality purposes. My name is Ben. You've been watching the Texas Tool Crib. I'll see you in the next one.